So today, we're going to dive into the work of physicist David Deutsch. And this is a thinker whose ideas are so fundamental, so big, they literally force you to question everything. I mean, science, reality, even the future of humanity itself. And our whole journey starts with a mystery that goes all the way back to the dawn of our species. Think about this. For the vast, vast majority of human history, our ancestors lived incredibly hard lives. Now, they had the same brains we do, right? The same basic wants to be warm, safe, fed. They wanted to make their lives better. And yet, for almost 200,000 years, progress was pretty much zero. Nothing changed. So why? What was it that kept humanity trapped in a cycle of suffering for so long? And when you look at this timeline, you really get the scale of the problem. It's just staggering. For almost our entire existence, we were stuck in stasis. Then, a little flicker of change, and then ignition. A complete explosion of knowledge and progress that has totally transformed our world in just a few hundred years. This wasn't a biological change in our brains. It was a change in our ideas. The problem, as David Deutsch puts it, was always a problem of knowledge. All right, so here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with that historical stalemate, then we'll dig into the philosophical breakthrough that finally unlocked all that progress. From there, we'll see how this leads to a wild new theory of physics called constructor theory, check out its power to unify science, apply it to the huge debate on AGI, and finally unpack Deutsch's really profound philosophy of optimism. Okay, Section 1, the stalemate of knowledge. So the reason for all those millennia of stagnation, it wasn't a lack of intelligence. It wasn't a lack of motivation. Our ancestors were just as smart as we are. The problem was cultural. It was a really flawed idea about where truth actually comes from. See, for most of history, societies weren't built to create new things. They were built to preserve tradition. The source of truth was always some unquestionable authority, a sacred text, a tribal elder, a powerful myth. And this created a culture that was actively hostile to change. If you questioned authority, you were being dangerous. New ideas were threats. And the result of that? Well, errors, once they got established, they became stuck for generations, leading to that huge period of suffering and stasis we saw in the timeline. Section 2, the power of error. So how did we break out of this trap? Well, the key? It didn't come from physics. It came from philosophy, specifically from the work of a guy named Karl Popper, who completely flipped our understanding of how knowledge is even created. And you really have to get this shift in thinking. The old way, even when we moved past pure authority, was still all about finding certainty. It was this idea that we observe the world and then we kind of induce theories from what we see, trying to prove them right. Popper basically came along and said, nope, that's a total dead end. Instead, he argued that knowledge grows through conjecture and criticism. We don't prove our theories right, we find what's wrong with them and correct the errors. We make these creative guesses and then we try our absolute hardest to prove them wrong. Deutsch has this perfect, kind of funny, modern example for this problem. His phone's voice assistant. He says the word theory a lot, right? And his phone often mistakes it for Siri and activates. Well, the more this happens, the more the program's algorithm is confirmed in its own mistake. It can't correct itself because it's just looking for patterns that fit the model it already has. It's a self-confirming loop that just digs the error in deeper, exactly like those old failed models of knowledge. So this new way of thinking gives us this incredible engine for making progress. First, you don't start with an observation. You start with a problem, a conflict in your existing ideas. Then you make a guess, a creative, bold conjecture for how to solve it. This is pure imagination, not just logic. And then comes the most important step. You are relentless. You criticize and test that guess, actively trying to find its flaws. Look, most guesses are going to fail. But the ones that survive, that's real progress. And this cycle, it doesn't lead to some final, perfect truth. It just moves us from having bad problems to having better, more interesting problems. This is the engine that kicked off the scientific revolution. Section 3, a new law of reality. Okay, now hold on, because this is where things get really wild. If this whole error-correcting, problem-solving thing is how knowledge grows, Deutsch asks this profound question. Shouldn't our most fundamental theory of reality, physics itself, be expressed in a way that actually reflects this? Shouldn't it be about what's possible and what isn't? So to get what Deutsch is doing, you first have to understand how physics usually works, right? The standard view is kind of like this. You take the starting position of everything in the universe, you apply the laws of motion, and then you can predict the path of every single particle. It's a predictive machine, focused entirely on what will happen, given that starting point. Constructor theory just flips this whole thing on its head. It says the most fundamental layer of reality isn't about trajectories, it's about transformations. It wants to rewrite all the laws of physics in terms of a super simple dichotomy: which physical tasks are possible and which are impossible, and why. The focus completely shifts from what will happen to what can be made to happen.
Let's just really lock this in, because this is the whole game right here. The old view is predictive. It says, given this setup, here's what the future looks like. Constructor theory is counterfactual. It's timeless. It just says this transformation is possible and that one is impossible, period. It's a deeper, more general layer of explanation that sits underneath the laws of motion themselves.
Section 4. Unifying Physics and Beyond. All right, so you might be thinking, okay, that's a cool idea, but why? Why go through all the trouble of this radical shift? Well, because, as Deutsch argues, constructor theory has just immense explanatory power. It lets us solve problems that have been stuck for ages and unify fields of science that seem totally separate. And the reach of this idea is just stunning. So take something like the conservation of energy. It's not just a rule anymore. It becomes a statement that the task of creating a perpetual motion machine is physically impossible. The second law of thermodynamics, that messy statistical thing, it becomes this super precise statement that certain tasks are possible while the reverse is not. It can even define abstract concepts in physical terms. Information becomes a physical medium where certain transformations are possible. And this is the most profound part. Knowledge gets a physical definition. It's a special kind of information, an abstract constructor that causes itself to stay in existence. Think of a gene in DNA, or a really powerful scientific theory. Section 5. The AGI debate. Okay, let's bring all this abstract stuff down to earth with a really big, really current debate. Why, after decades of trying, do we still not have artificial general intelligence, or AGI? Well, the answer, according to Deutsch, lies in this deep difference between real knowledge and just processing information. So, are we on a straight road to AGI, just needing a faster car, more processing power? Or are we completely lost in a philosophical maze, not even knowing which direction to go? Is it a hardware problem or a thinking problem? So here we have the two competing camps, basically. On one side, you have Deutsch's view. He says we've made no progress whatever because we're on the completely wrong track. We need a philosophical breakthrough first. We have to understand what creativity and explanation are. He says you can't define a true AGI by just its behavior, like passing a test. It has to be able to create new explanatory knowledge. Then, on the other side, you've got thinkers like Ben Goertzel, a pioneer in the field. He says the bottlenecks are mostly technical. Our computers are still weak compared to the brain, the money is all going to narrow AI, and just integrating these massively complex software systems is an absolute nightmare. Both sides agree we're not there, but they have totally different reasons why. And all of this, it brings us to the grand finale of Deutsch's worldview. By putting together that Popperian theory of knowledge with the physical reality described by constructor theory, he lands on this powerful, completely rational basis for being optimistic about the future. Now, it is absolutely crucial to get what he means by optimism. This isn't just wishful thinking, like, oh, everything will be fine. It's a principle. It states that all of our problems, poverty, disease, even death itself, are, in principle, solvable. They aren't punishments or fundamental limits of the universe. They're simply caused by a lack of the right knowledge. And since knowledge is something we can create, there's no fundamental reason we can't eventually solve them. This quote it perfectly nails the scope of that optimism. And it's a direct result of constructor theory. Think about it. If a transformation isn't impossible according to the laws of physics, then it must be possible. The only thing standing between us and achieving it is creating the necessary knowledge, the abstract constructor, to make it happen. Our potential is literally only limited by physical law itself. This is honestly one of my favorite quotes from Deutsch because it just perfectly reframes our place in the cosmos. We're always told the universe is so vast we should feel so small and insignificant. Deutsch says that's a category error. Our significance doesn't come from our size or our address. It comes from what we can do. As far as we know, we are the only things in the entire universe capable of creating explanatory knowledge, and that right there makes us cosmically significant, no matter the scale. And so this is the question that leaves us with. If the only limit to what we can do is what the laws of physics allow, and the key to doing it is knowledge, and there's no foreseeable limit to the knowledge we can create, then are we standing at the very beginning of an infinite journey of progress? The story of humanity might not be some brief, meaningless flicker in a giant cosmos, but the very start of something boundless. It could be the beginning of infinity.